Hey everybody, it's Angel. You're watching ASMR Angel Reads. I know like nobody's watching my videos, but it's been about a week since I posted last. I've been busy with my orchids, trying to get them winterized and all that good stuff. I had 3 that were going to give me flower spikes, and I broke one of the spikes, so now I only have 2. I bought a few, and I got to repot some, so I still got lots to do. But anyway, we're chapter 6 in Daggerspell. The last section of chapter 6 saw Jill and Rodri having a secret toward affair, and Cullen, Jill's father, realized his love for his daughter was a little unclean kind of love. But they're both trapped at Rodri's castle because it's winter time, and Cullen is the commander of Rodri's soldiers, and Jill is in Lovian, who's Rodri's mother. She's in her retinue. And then I need my glasses. Since Nevin never slept more than 4 hours a night, he was up late that evening, brooding over the Dark Master and his peculiar plot. For all his scrying on the etheric, he found no further traces of the enemy, and neither had any Dwemer Master in the kingdom. He was just thinking that it was late enough for even him to be in bed when Jill's gray gnome popped into manifestation on the table. The little creature was furious, making soundless snarls and pulling its hair as it danced up and down. Now, what's all this? The gnome grabbed his hand and pulled as if he were trying to haul him to his feet. What, you want me to come with you? The gnome nodded vigorously yes and pulled him again. Is something wrong with Jill? At that, the gnome leapt into his final dance of fury. Nevin lit the lantern and followed the gnome as it led him toward the women's quarters. As soon as the gnome realized that he was going to go to Jill's chamber, it disappeared. Holding the lantern low, Nevin turned down the main corridor and met Rodri barefoot, tousled, and obviously very tired. Rodri squeaked like a caught burglar, and Nevin collared him like one. You little dolt, Nevin hissed. I just couldn't sleep, just taking a bit of air. Ha, come along, lad. Nevin marched Rodri back to his chamber, which was some ways away on the floor above the women's quarters, and shoved him through the door. Rodri sank into a chair and looked up bleary-eyed. His lips were swollen. How by every god did you know I was in Jill's bed? How do you think I knew, dolt? Rodri squeaked and flinched back. I'm not going to blast you with Dwemer fires or such like, Nevin said with some asperity. Tempted though I may be, all I want to do is think. You won't be able to keep this midnight trysting a secret forever. As the saying goes, fine dresses can't hide a big belly. What will Cullen do, pray tell? Not. We've had words about it, and he let me know that Jill's mine as long as I treat her as well as a great lord's mistress deserves. Nevin felt like a man who's drawn his sword with a flourish only to find it broken off at the hilt. Truly, I couldn't believe my ears either. Rodri did look sincerely amazed, but he did say it. I swear to you that I'll always treat her well. Ah, ye gods, Nevin, can't you understand how much I love her? You must have been young once. Didn't you ever love a woman this much? Nevin was caught speechless by the irony of the thing. So he had, the same one. Unceremoniously, Nevin kicked the heir to the tyranny out of his chamber and barred the door behind him. He sat down in a chair and ran his fingers idly over the rough wood of the table edge. Jill's gnome appeared, all smiles and bows. I'm sorry, my friend, you'll have to put up with this, just like I will. The gnome hissed and disappeared. Nevin was just as heartsick. She was gone from him in this life, and as she'd been gone in so many others. He was sure of it. All the amusements and crises of a great court would fill her mind and her time until her latent Dwemer talents faded away. He could see it all. Although Rodri's wife would have to accept his mistress, she would come to hate Jill when the various vassals paid their court to Jill and not to her. The fight would come to the surface when Jill had a couple of Rodri's bastards and was trying to get them settled in good positions. No doubt Rodri would favor Jill's children too, making his wife hate her even more. None of this would leave any place for the Dwemer. Nevin's first impulse was to leave the Dun that very night and ride far away, but Jill would need him. For all the pain of seeing his vow go unfulfilled for yet another long stretch of years, he would stay simply because she needed him. For a moment Nevin felt so odd that he didn't know what was wrong with him. Then he realized that for the first time in 100 years he was weeping. When the 10th day passed with no word from Rice, Lovian was furious enough to dispense with formalities and send a message to him. Although she carefully phrased the letter in humble and courteous terms, at the root she told him the entire tyranny would be in upheaval until he cursed, well, did something about it. When the scribe read it to her impatient vassals, they cheered. "You have my sympathy, my lord," Lovian said to them. "We'll see if the mother's words can prod the Gorbert to action." Lovian left them to discuss her letter and went up to the women's hall. As a child she had played there at her mother's side, and the familiar room was still comfortable refuge, even though she was the lord of the Dun now, not its lady. When she came in, she found Daniel trying to help Jill with her sewing. "Shall I fetch her grace some wine?" Jill said. "Anything to get out of this needlework," Lovian said with a smile. "You may lay aside if you wish, Jill, but truly I don't want anything at the moment." Jill threw her practice piece into the work basket with such fury that Lovian and Daniel both laughed at her. "Here, Dana," Lovian said, "is it truly time we put some thought into getting Rodri married?" "True enough," Daniel said. "I've been thinking about the Gorbert of Camwin's younger daughter. With Rice and Rodri always feuding, it would be wise to give the Tyrant some connections with another Gorbert then." "Now that's an excellent point," she said, level-headed. "She's a level-headed lass." Jill went as still as a hunted animal. A number of things Lovian had noticed all came together in her mind. "Oh, Jill, my sweet, you're not in love with my wretched son, are you?" For an answer, Jill blushed scarlet. "Oh, you poor child," Lovian said. "You have all my sympathy, but Jill, I could never let you marry Rodri." "I'm more than aware of that, your grace," Jill said, and she was in perfect control of every word. "Besides, I have no doubt at all that Lord Rodri is going to make his wife a very bad husband." It was so perfectly done that Lovian was impressed. "I see," Lovian gave her a pleasant nod. "I'm glad that you're such a sensible lass." Lovian and Daniel exchanged a glance, then changed the subject. Later they sent Jill off on an errand and discussed the matter, agreeing that whether she could sew or not, Jill was going to fit very well into court. Without an open word being said, they now knew who Rodri's mistress was, and they could pick his wife accordingly. Since Lovian knew that Nevin had an interest in Jill, she made a point of discussing the matter with him privately. As she expected, Nevin was disappointed, but he seemed resigned. "After all, I'll see her often and you're done. Of course, as long as things sit well with you. Oh, here, Lova, what have you been thinking, that I was an old ram about to make a fool of myself over a young ewe?" Lovian felt her cheeks coloring, but Nevin was far more amused than insulted. "I assure you," he went on, "that I am more aware than most of the years I carry. I'm fond of Jill, but truly my main interest in her was her Dwemer talent." "Of course, it's very odd, but it's so hard to keep in mind that you're Dwemer, and anyone can be Dwemer, truly. And here I saw Jill have the vision of hers. Well, the mind shrinks from what it can't understand. I heard your bard practicing his praise song about the war. He's reporting very faithfully what happened. Do you think anyone will believe a word of it in, say, 15 years? They won't. A typical bard song, they'll say, full of lies and fancies, and maybe it's just as well." 3 days later, the message finally came from Rice. Lovian had an odd premonition about it and decided to read it privately rather than have it read out loud in the open hall. She made the right decision. My lady mother, it ran, forgive me for the delay in attending your important affairs. I have been investigating the matter of this war in order to ascertain whether Lord Roderi's report was in the least accurate. I am summoning him and his allies to Aberwin to give me an account of their conduct. You, of course, are also most welcome to my meet and mead, and we shall settle the matter then. Your humble son, Rice, Scorbert Aberwin. Oh, you little beast, Lovian said aloud. You're certainly Tinger's son, aren't you? Nevin was more than pleased when Lovian asked him to join her entourage for the trip to Aberwin. He even allowed her to provide him with a new shirt and decent brita so that he could pass inconspicuously as one of her counselors. Lovian was taking Jill, Danyan, her scribe, several servants, and then Cullen as the captain of the honor guard and 25 men, 15 for her and 10 for Rodri as the ranks allowed. As she sourly remarked, Rice could feel part of her household for a while after letting her vassals feed off her for so long. I'm rather surprised you're taking Jill, Nevin remarked. She's unused to large courts and their ways. Well, she really does have to start getting used to them. Besides, having her there will keep Rodri calm. Nevin was about to make some remark about trouble with Cullen if Jill were blatantly displayed as Rodri's mistress, but he stopped himself simply because the captain seemed to have no objections to his daughter's position. Ruefully, Nevin had to admit that he was disappointed. He'd been hoping that her fear of her father's wrath would keep Jill away from Rodri and free for Dwemer. The night before they left for Aberwin, Nevin decided to seek Cullen out and found him in the chamber in the barracks. Dressed in a new shirt blazoned with red lions, Cullen sat on the side of his bed and polished his sword by lantern light. He greeted Nevin hospitably and offered him the only chair. I just want a few words with you about something of a delicate matter. I'll wager you mean Jill? Just that. I'll admit to being surprised that you'd let her do what she's doing. Cullen sighted down the sword blade, found some near invisible fleck of rust, and began working on it with a rag. I think you'd best be least surprised of any man, Cullen said at last. You're the one who knows why I had to let her go. When he looked up straight into Nevin's eyes, Nevin had to admire him for the first time in 400 years. All the arrogance that Geraint had flaunted life after life was gone, leaving only a certain proud humility that came from facing the bitter realities of his life. There's more kinds of honor than battle glory, Nevin said. You deserve yours. With a shrug, Cullen tossed the sword onto the bed. Jill's going to do cursed well out of this, isn't she? She'll have a better life than any that I thought I could ever give her. Even if I had a lord's ransom for her dowry, what kind of husband could I have found for her? A craftsman of some kind, a tavern owner maybe? And there she'd be working hard all her life. For a silver dagger's bastard, she's risen pretty high. So she has, truly. I'd never thought of things quite in that way. Doubtless you never had to. What's that old saying? It's better for a woman to keep her poverty than lose her virtue? I'd have slit Jill's throat rather than let her turn into a whore, but when you ride the long road, you learn not to be too fussy about fine shades of virtue. Ye gods, I sold my own honor 1,000 times over. Who am I to look down my nose at her? Well, true spoken, but most men wouldn't be so reasonable about their only daughter. Cullen shrugged and picked up the sword again to run callous fingertips down the gutter of the blade. I'll tell you somewhat. I haven't told a soul this tale in 19 years, but have you ever wondered why I ended up with the God-scorned silver dagger? Often. I was afraid to ask. As well you might have been, Cullen gave him a thin smile. I was a rider in the Gorbert of Caremore's warband. There was a lass I fancied there waiting on a table in the great hall. Siren, Jill's mother, and another lad fancied her too. We fought over her like dogs over a bone until she made it clear enough that she favored me. So this other lad, may the gods blast me, but I've forgotten his name. Anyway, he wouldn't take her at her word and kept hanging around her. So one night I said somewhat to him about it and he drew on me. So I drew and killed him. Colin's voice dropped and he looked down at the sword across his knees. Right there in the Gorbert's barracks, his grace was all for hanging me, but the captain stepped in, saying that the other lad drew first. So his grace kicked me out instead, and my poor Syrian insisted on riding with me when I went. Colin looked up again. So you see, I swore then that I'd never kill another man over a woman. It doesn't do you or her any one cursed bit of good. Nevin was speechless for a moment, simply because Colin had no idea of just how much of his weird he was laying aside with that simple truth. You learn, Colin said. I was stubborn young lad, but you learn. Truly, I was stubborn myself when I was that young. No doubt you know, Erdman, why we rub each other so raw. We're so much alike, ye gods, so we are. At the time, Aberwyn was the biggest city in Eldid, over 17,000 people living in its warren of curving streets and closely packed houses. Unwalled, it spread along the Abergwyn up the harbor, where the Gorbert's fleet of war galleys shared piers with merchants from Devery and Bardic both. Right in the middle of the town stood the enormous dun of the Gorbert, a towering symbol of justice. Inside, 30-foot stone walls spread a ward covering some 30 acres. Clustered with the usual huts, barracks, and sheds, in the middle rose the Brock complex, a round central tower of 6 stories, 3 secondary towers of 3, but the most amazing thing of all was that the Brock stood in the middle of a garden. Lawns, beds of roses, a fountain, all set off from the ward by the low brick wall. Everywhere writhed the open-jawed dragon of Aberwyn, carved onto the outer gates, displayed on the blue and silver banners hanging from the Brock, sculpted in marble in the center of the fountain, carved again on the doors into the Brock, inlaid in blue slate on the floor of the great hall, blazoned on the shirts of every rider and servant, embroidered into the bed hangings and cushions of the luxurious chamber that Jill was going to share with Daniel. On the mantel over their hearth there was even a small silver statuette of a dragon. Jill picked it up and studied it. It's lovely, isn't it? Daniel said. The Maleweeds have always collected fine silver. It is. It must have been quite a wretched for you to leave all this splendor when her grace retired to Cannabane. It was, I'll admit, to being just at least bit glad when Lovian's brother got himself killed. Terrible of me, but there you are. Daniel dismissed the subject with a little shrug. Now, Jill, you'll have to be very careful while we're here. Oh, I'm sure of that, Dan. I'm terrified. Now people will make some allowances, but follow what I do. Stick as close to me as possible, and please don't say horse dung or such like. You're not in the barracks anymore. Now let's have a bit of a wash and then get you out of those nasty briga in a proper dress. Since Jill had never ridden side saddle in her life and an untrained woman was in real danger, she'd been allowed to wear her old clothes on the ride to Aberwyn. She was surprised at how good they felt and how much she hated to take them off again. Once she was dressed to Daniel's satisfaction, Daniel took her to the women's hall to present her to the Gorbert's wife. Donilla was a lovely woman with fine dark eyes, a wealth of chestnut hair, and a figure as slender as a lass. She seated them graciously and had a servant bring wine in real glass goblets, but she was distracted as she and Daniel chatted, and all the time she twisted and untwisted a silk handkerchief between her fingers. Jill was glad when they left. Dana, Jill said as soon as they were back in the privacy of their chamber, is her grace ill or such like? She's not. Rice is about to put her aside for being barren. My heart truly aches for her. And what will happen to her? Our Lady's going to make her a marriage with a widowed cousin of hers. He has heirs already, so he'll be glad of a beautiful new wife. If it weren't for that, she'd have to go back shamed to her brother. I doubt me if he'd receive her well. Jill felt sick. She had never realized before just how dependent on their men noble-born women were. There was no chance for them to work a farm with the help of their sons, or to marry their dead husband apprentice and keep his shop, but much less to open a shop of their own. Suddenly she wondered what was going to become of her. Would she someday be reduced to cringing and fawning around Rodri to make sure she still has his favor? Donilla will ride back with us when we leave, Daniel went on. We'll all have to be very kind to her. The worst thing of all is that she has to be there when Rice publicly denounces her. Oh, by the black ass of the Lord's hell, his grace is as hard-hearted as that? Jill Lamb, do watch your tongue, but it's not Rice, it's the law. Rice would spare her the shame if he could, truly he would, but he can't. When they went down to the great hall for dinner, Jill was relieved to find that they wouldn't be eating at Rice's table. Where the ordinary Dunn only had one honor table, Aberwin's had 6. One for the Gorbert and his family, the others for guests and noble-born officials of his court. Jill and Daniel sat with the Senchel and Equerry, the bard, and their wives. From where she was seated, Jill could just see Rodri seated at his brother's left. Although they had the same coloring and certainly shared a look to their jaw that they'd inherited from Lovian, they were so different that Jill found it hard to believe that they were brothers. Doubtless it was Rodri's elven blood that made his face so chiseled and delicate. In comparison, Rice looked coarse, yet the Gorbert still had a good-looking man in his way, not the fiend that Jill had been picturing. The meal was elaborate, with course of pickled vegetables arranged in patterns on little plates, a course of lark pies, and one fruit preceding the roast pork. Jill paid strict attention to her manners and spoke to no one until at last the bard's wife, a round-faced little blonde named Kama, turned to her with cool, appraising eyes. This must be your first time at court, Kama said. It is, truly. It's rather splendid. Indeed, was your father one of our country lords? Jill was taken utterly aback. Daniel leaned over with a limp smile for Camion that seemed to be masking the word bitch. Jill is a very important member of Tyrion Lovian's retinue, Dana allowed herself a glance at Rodri. Very important. I see, Kama gave Jill a warm smile. Well, you must allow me to entertain you in my chambers sometime. My thanks, I shall have to see how much leisure my duties to her grace allows. Daniel gave Jill a small nod of approval. Jill picked at her food and decided that she was no longer hungry. Although she thought of herself as a falcon, she felt as if she were dining with eagles who might turn on her at any moment. She found herself watching Rodri, who was eating fast and silently. Finally he rose, looked her way with a toss of his head, and strode out of the hall. Flustered, Jill turned to Daniel. You can follow in a little bit, Daniel whispered. Jill dutifully sipped her wine and made small talk for some minutes, then excused herself and hurried away from the table. She found a page who knew where Rodri was quartered and followed him up to the spiral staircase and through the confusing corridors of joined blocks for what seemed an embarrassingly long way before he pointed out Rodri's door with a sly and knowing smile. Jill hurried in and frankly slammed the door behind her. The tiny chamber was sparse, furnished with what looked like cast-offs from grander chambers elsewhere. Its one window looked directly down on the kitchen hut, and the smell of grease hung in the air. His boots and belt already off, Rodri lounged on the lumpy bed. Did Rice say anything about the rebellion? Not one cursed word. We'll have the formal discussion tomorrow morning, he says. The piss-proud little bastard, as if he was a criminal, hauled up before him for stealing horses. I don't want to talk about it, my love. I want to get you into this bed and keep you here until you beg for mercy. Indeed, Jill began to untie her kirtle. Then you'll have a long night of it. Okay, that's done for tonight. Thanks for listening. Bye.